Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Life in the Peloton. We've got another episode coming up. I want to welcome my co-host here, Lionel Burney from the Cycling Podcast.
Hi there, Mitch. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. How are you doing? Where are you at in this current state of what's going on in the world at the moment?
Well, as you probably expect, I'm at home. I'm in the UK, so our sort of the first big stage of lockdown was enacted in the last 24 hours. So really just trying to adapt to the new normal. Yeah, avoiding getting on with jobs around the house as well as trying to keep working and cover the gap in the regular episodes of the Cycling Podcast and still producing episodes even though that there's no racing to talk about, which has been a fun and diverting challenge. I know it's a very serious situation that's going on, but we all need a little bit of a break from the bad news that's all around us. So, and then with everyone indoors, hopefully they'll be seeking out episodes to listen to. So that's what I've been doing. How about yourself?
Well, yes, a little bit opposite to you, and I think I'm a little bit further down the line in terms of lockdown, but I've been getting into those household chores and I've been sort of relishing in it. It's been my daily task and I'm ticking off a lot of those jobs you've never wanted to do, and for lack of a better expression, I've been earning my beer every day, and even about lunchtime, I'm like, you know what? It's been a good day's work. So it's been able to help me escape that news and just, play with the kids and get into it. And then, I touch back in with what's going on in the world each afternoon and then get brought back down to reality and understand the seriousness of this situation. So it's a bit of an up and down sort of roller coaster for me in the household here. And at this moment, I think we're doing really well in the Docker household.
Oh, that's good to hear. I think it's up and down for everybody, isn't it? So, the little bits of light relief are going to be very welcome, I think. So I've certainly enjoyed talking to Richard Moore and Daniel Freed, my co-hosts on the Cycling Podcast, just a bit of escapism for an hour. I've even set up my smart turbo trainer, Mitch. I'm going to be doing probably an hour on that this afternoon, get my office door open, and I'll get a screen in front of me, and I might even reactivate my Zwift account and get a few ride-ons from people.
Well, how convenient. And I thought this was such a good podcast to do for the current time. I was always going to do this podcast because it's something that I was very interested in. The podcast we've got for you today is Talking Zwift, and conveniently my coach, Kevin Poulton, is actually a coach on Zwift, so he knows it very well, and he's always implemented Zwift for me ever since Matt Hayman won Roubaix back in 2016. Matt Hayman knew Zwift, and we go into this story, and Kevin discovered Zwift in a way back then, and I was training with him, and throughout my season, I'm always jumping on the Zwift, whether the weather's good or bad. He sees a lot of benefits in it, and in this time, we're only on Zwift, so I thought, let's uncover the real truth about indoor training and talk to him about it. And it's actually a really great podcast because it's the first one I've done online. I wasn't face-to-face with him, but knowing him so well, I felt the general connection was there, and he brought out some great stuff, some stuff that, I've got some good sessions ahead of me coming up, and Kev presented that to me on the podcast.
Well, let's have a listen, shall we, Mitch? This is you and your coach, Kevin Poulton.
Let's do it. Here we are, guys. Kevin Poulton, Talking Zwift. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Life in the Peloton. Today I've got a pretty special guest on board. I've got my coach, Kevin Poulton, and Zwift coach, Kevin Poulton, the specialist in indoor training. And I think it's a pretty good time to talk about indoor training. But before we get into that, welcome, Kev, to the podcast.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks for having me. And it's been a long time coming, I guess, to have me on your podcast finally.
I know. We've been chatting many ideas out on the road or over the phone. And Kev, did you hear that last podcast? And you'd be like, oh, I did hear it, but it wasn't that good, And we go back to to the drawing board and work on it again. So you've been a good sounding board for me. So it's good to have you on the pod finally. Welcome. It's great.
Perfect. Thanks.
So today we've got a special podcast, and I thought it'd be a great way to start this off. I've sort of interluded a little bit to what we're going to talk about, indoor training, Zwift. I'm pretty sure people know or have heard about those two things before, but I thought let's take it right back to 2016, 28th of February, Het Nieuwsblad. You're watching it on TV, Matt Hayman crashes, breaks his arm, and from that point on, it looked like it was all over for Hayman. Matt Hayman, if anyone doesn't know, is a classic specialist, Paris-Roubaix being the pinnacle of his classics, and let alone Tour of Flanders and the classics leading through. Het Nieuwsblad being the first classic, he crashes. And what was going through your mind at that moment when you were watching that on TV, Kev?
Yeah, so I was back in Australia, as you say, watching the classics on TV, and up until that point, Matt's preparation had been very good. He was where he wanted to be. And I remember watching the race, and there was a crash, and I saw it was Matt, and the helicopter was overhead. And whenever Matt crashes, he gets up straight away. And on this occasion, he didn't. He sat down the side of the road and held his arm or his shoulder. And at that moment, I said to my wife, who was watching as well, I said, he's broken his collarbone. I said, there goes the classics. My first thought was that all that hard work is gone to waste now, and we'll have to reassess where we're at and look at the second half of the season. And then after the accident, I gave Matt some space because I knew he'd be disappointed and so on, and have a lot to think about. A couple of days later, probably 4 days later, I get this message from Matt, and he says, I'm on this thing called Zwift, and I'm going to keep training. And to be honest, I was expecting a phone call saying, yep, broken arm, classics is over, let's reassess and look at the second part of the season. But no, he sent me the photo of him on the ergo with his arm on the ladder as well, which I think it's a photo we've all seen now. And so once I knew he was motivated and ready to train, and he's on this thing called Zwift, I had used it, or actually attempted to use it once before when they released the course for Richmond Worlds, but it was actually unsuccessful that time because I didn't have the Bluetooth dongle and things didn't connect, and it was all frustrating. So, those problems we all go through. So I knew what it was, but I'd never actually used it. And so all of a sudden, here's Matt Hayman with really good form, and he wants to keep training. So I had to get it set up quickly and work out what it was and how we're going to use it.
And that's like, to put things in perspective here, and I've got to promote the other podcasts I've done with Matt Hayman. Go back and listen to it night before Roubaix and the night after Roubaix. This is back when Matt Hayman won Roubaix. I was lucky enough to get him on the podcast the night before he won. And what blew my mind when I did those podcasts with him, and even just in the lead up to Roubaix, we just started hearing whisper that, hey, Hayman, he's still training for Roubaix. And exactly what you just said then, you're expecting to get the phone call from the rider saying, hey, let's think about the end of the season. The second half of the season, let's make a new plan. That is a logical thought in my book. To hear that he was on the trainer 2 days later was just like, it blew my mind. And I guess a good question would be to you. You knew Matty. You're his coach. I didn't say that before, but it was pretty obvious now that you were coaching Matt. And I knew exactly what you were just saying then, that you'd lost so much. I know what those summers are like. You build up, you're ready for the classics, and you're ready to race. Knowing Matty for all those years and watching him and then coaching him for those years leading to Roubaix, do you think he could have won doing his normal training, his normal racing? Or do you think the indoor training had something to do with it?
Look, it's a big question, and it's one I think about a lot. And look, the answer is, without that block of indoor training that Matt was forced to do, I don't think he would have won Roubaix. And there's a lot of examples in that race of what he gained by the almost month on the indoor trainer. During the race, when he made that early break, he was very comfortable there. And then there was a few occasions there where he accidentally rode away from the breakaway. So he was so aerobically fit, he was so efficient that he was really doing it quite easily. And, he was just so efficient at burning fats. He was preserving carbs and glycogen for the last part of the race. And again, when you look at how strong he was when he was finally caught by the breakaway, normally if you're on the early break, you get caught and you soon go at the back. And then he was going toe-to-toe with those guys. And then there was even that occasion, probably 20 k's from the finish, where Stannard almost took him out in the corner and Matt was forced off the road and he lost contact with the main group and he fought his way back. And then when he came back at that point, that's where he knew he was on a really good day and these guys weren't better than him. That's when he knew he was in the race. So look, what we did indoors, there was so much that we gained. We didn't realise it at the time, and then we looked at it in hindsight and looked at, okay, what we did, what were the gains and so on. But I guess there's even a story before that point is that he almost wasn't even selected by the team to be in the race. They thought there's no way he could be prepared to race a race of that distance, that duration, that intensity with the training that he had done. So we really had to prove that he was ready to race. The form was good. And I remember at the presentation of Roubaix the day before, I saw you as well. And, I was talking to Matt on his own. At that point, there was no one crowding around him. He was just another rider there. And I said to Matt, look, we've been looking at all the data and everything points to the fact that tomorrow you're going to have a very good day. And it was just a simple statement, but it was the absolute truth that everything had come together from the accident, the work he did before the accident, the work he did after it, and everything indicated he was going to have a great day. And I think just that little bit of confidence in the work he'd done and also no pressure just allowed him to go out there and just race it.
There's a couple of angles there I want to talk to you about because you sort of just got my mind thinking there. And that's something, first of all, this is a personal opinion and I think this has sort of been thrown out the window a little bit by Maddie's ride, is that previous to Maddie's story, my thought was, and I think a lot of people's thoughts were, you needed those races in the legs. You needed to have the hard 260k races leading up to a race like Roubaix, the 3-4 weeks before. San Remo, Ghent-Wevelgem, Tour of Flanders. And I thought if I wasn't getting those races in, if I crashed out or I pulled out early, I would try and get them in a midweek training ride. And apart from that is also another thing there is it's a psychological factor that he was removed from that bubble in Belgium and he just came in fresh, ready to go. I guess there's two big questions there, but what I want to ask you is, did that change your mind on those two things, or especially the training side of things about the classics and about other racing, is that maybe there's another way to, there's more ways to skin a cat,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the main point that everyone in the peloton has learnt from Matt's experience and success is the importance of being fresh, especially during the classics period, because there's so much racing. And by the time the guys get to Flanders and Roubaix, so many guys are just burnt out and done. And everyone would experience this themselves in their own training when they're forced to have a rest through sickness or injury. They quite often come back and have some of the best form of their life, and because they're forced to rest. And it really just highlights to everyone in the peloton how fatigued they are during this period and how important it is to recover well. And since 2016, since Matt's win in Roubaix, I think a lot of people are changing their race program and being a bit more picky in what races they do compete in, and looking for more flexibility from the teams to have a different race program.
What about your idea then on indoor training? Was that situation, like you said, you'd been on Zwift once before. Obviously, you're aware of doing ergos old school style, in a room, in a dark room, following a program, watching the heart rate monitor. Did your opinion change on indoor training from that 2-3 week period that Matty, the Roubaix win was obviously the icing on the cake, but before he'd actually had his ride at Paris-Roubaix, were you starting to get convinced that, hang on, we might be onto something here?
Yeah, definitely. We were seeing some really good response to the training. But the key point here is that indoor training is always going to complement your outdoor training. So Matt was forced to do it all indoors, but before this period, he had a good base behind him. So he already had good fitness, but the forced period of indoor training just allowed us to really train specifically for the demands of Roubaix. And I think this is with the key point. So we knew what Roubaix required to win it, and we replicated that indoors. And we saw a lot of things happening along the way in terms of his response to the training. We knew he was getting more efficient. We knew VO2 was increasing. We weren't going for massive volume, but he was able to do double ergo sessions for almost 4 weeks. So he would do an hour and a half in the morning and an hour and a half in the afternoon. So we didn't do really any single long rides indoors. It was always probably 90-minute efforts.
And that's something I want to get into a little bit later on, is that the intricate details of what actually an indoor training session, how it differs from an outdoor session. And like you said, a 6 hours outdoor. I want to talk to you a little bit about that afterwards, get a little bit more technical. But before we get to that, in case anyone doesn't know what the hell we're talking about, I think we should just go back a few steps and go, what is Zwift and where the hell did it ever come from? So what is it, Kev?
Yeah, well, like I said before, indoor training's been around forever. Like I was using it 20 years ago as a coach or a rider myself, so it's always been there. And even 20 years ago or more, people knew that when you rode indoors, you got a good workout out of it. Everyone knew indoor training was quality training, but because you were staring at a wall, you just mentally, you can't do big volume on it. You can't do consecutive days indoors. It was just wasn't engaging, wasn't motivating. Zwift is obviously this virtual world of riding created by John Mayfield. Actually came from a gaming background. So he was a gamer himself, but also liked to keep fit. He didn't like to ride outdoors. And so he wanted to make it more engaging, and he wanted to make it actual game to ride indoors. And he's got some really good ideas, it's all about engaging the athlete and keeping him motivated to ride indoors, to get him to come back day after day. And originally he was doing things like collecting coins. So think about Mario Kart racing, but on bikes. That's what Zwift is that's what it's modeled off, that kind of thing. So it's about entertainment. But now that it's a serious training tool, coaches and sports scientists like myself are looking at the science behind it, but it really is just a motivating tool to get people to train indoors. And now that we have people able to ride indoors and race indoors, it's opened up a whole new world of racing and training, and a whole new community as well, and a whole new language. And the everyday rider is now educated on what's per kilogram and drafting and coefficient of draft and so on. And yeah, it's really just expanded the knowledge of everyone's cycling training.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those specs that you were talking about. And now we're seeing a lot more professionals use Zwift for indoor training. And the reason at the start of the podcast I said it's quite a convenient time for doing this podcast is because with the coronavirus at the moment, a lot of professionals can't train outside anymore. So we're forced, like Maddie, to be inside and find other ways to train. But actually guys are doing this before these kind of situations because they've been finding out, hang on, this has been helping me, as you alluded to with Maddie, in many different ways. What are some of those ways that you've seen it help, for instance, myself or Maddie? What's the science behind it? Why is it actually working?
Yeah, well, this is a long conversation, this one. But like you said there, most people's first experience with indoor training is because they're forced to train indoors through injury normally. And there's so many examples of people that have come back from a block of indoor training at your level, professional level, and experienced success. Obviously, Matt's probably the most famous example. But there's guys like Steve Cummings, who came back from a broken leg, was forced to ride indoors, and he came out and won the British National Time Trial Championship and Road Championship in the same year from riding indoors. There's just so many examples of people doing that. So the science really is, there's a few things that are happening that I focus on. The main thing is that when we train indoors, there's this increased core body temperature. And from that, we get increased blood plasma, which means you get a massive increase in VO2 ability. So you become much more aerobically efficient. That's probably the main thing. And to do that, we need to train back-to-back consecutive sessions. So when you're forced to do almost a month indoors, obviously you're going to get a really huge boost there. So the first point there is the increased core body temperature. So my tip for anyone that's riding indoors, if you can, do 2 or 3 back-to-back sessions, over consecutive days, and try and do it as a block rather than doing, one day here, then a day off, another day. So try and do blocks of indoor training.
Is that enough? Just 2 or 3?
2 or 3 would be enough. Look, any more than that, it starts to become a mental game. So it's, if you do implement indoor training into your training regularly, if you're doing 2 or 3 days in a row, do it that way, and then do the rest of the sessions outdoors. But if you are able to do 10 days in a row, do 10 days leading into a race, which we'll get to but that's another point there. So we'll get to that in a moment though. So the other thing there is the pedal stroke now. So we talk about kinetic energy or inertia. When we're training on the ergo, if you're riding for, let's say, an hour, it's an hour of constant muscle tension. So if you're riding outdoors, you might be pedaling most of the time, but when you come up to the lights or a give way sign or something, you get out of the saddle, you stretch, you roll for a few seconds, and the tension releases in the muscles, and so you don't get that real constant muscle tension. Whereas when you're riding indoors, it's constant pedaling. And I think I do the maths quickly. So just say if you're doing 90 revs a minute for an hour, what's that? It's almost 5,000 pedal strokes in an hour of constant pedaling. Whereas if you're outdoors, you might do 4,500 pedal strokes in an hour. Multiply that over a week, and you're behind already. So that's why when you train indoors, there is that extra volume of pedal strokes. Think about it that way as well.
So if you could actually physically or mentally do 6 hours a day on the ergo, would you become a machine, or is it too much then?
I think that's too much. There's a limit there as well, where we need to start looking at fatigue, accumulated training load, and so on. So that would be massive. We do see a lot of Ironman triathletes doing their 6 hour rides indoors. We even see people, they call it Everesting now, indoor virtual Everesting. They're doing the 8,000 meters climbing indoors. So obviously those are extremes, but I think obviously it always comes back to Matt is obviously the best example, which we just were forced to do. So just to give everyone a brief background on the training that Matt did, it was pretty much 20 hours a week on the ergo with double sessions. So It wasn't crazy. If he was training outdoors at the time, it would have been almost 30 hours a week. So the volume was less. But like I said, when you look at the amount of pedal strokes continuously, it's probably pretty similar as well.
Wow, 20 hours a week on the ergo, I tell you, that's even as much as I've been getting into Zwift the last week a bit, and I don't mind it at all. 20 hours a week on there is quite intense because, like you said, you don't get that chance to roll, and there's something about, this is an obvious comment, but there's something about being outside and, seeing different things and having the wind come through your hair. So it does make it a lot easier, but there is still that psychological impact on it. I do want to also ask you now, given this current situation, and this is, you sort of alluded to this a little bit, is it feasible now? You said that with the Everesting scenario, where I've seen this before. I've been on a climb where I've seen this guy going up and down, and I was like, what's this guy up to? And he's like, I'm climbing Mount Everest in one day. It's 8,000 meters of climbing, is it? Is that
8,000. Oh, geez, 8,400 is it? 8,800?
Something like that. And they do it. Yeah. People do it in. I'm probably butchering this, but people do it in one day on a climb, and they get the cumulative kilometers on altitude meters on a climb. What I wanted to ask is that realistic? Like, if you're going to go and do that on Zwift, is it the same as going out to a climb and doing it? Or, better question, can you simulate some of these races that we're missing right now? For instance, we miss Milan-San Remo. We've got the Belgium Classics coming up. Even a stage race like Vuelta Catalunya. Can we somehow simulate these races that are going on at the moment on Zwift?
Yeah, definitely. And we've done that. So I guess just to step back to one point there, we talk about the pedaling indoors. To really simulate it, we need to look at crank torque and inertia. So when we train indoors, if you're doing erg mode, which for listeners, erg mode is when the smart trainer will set the resistance for you. So if you were asked to do 400 watts for an interval, no matter what cadence you do, the resistance will be 400 watts. That's erg mode. Now, if you do interval training in a bigger gear, say 53.12, you have more inertia because the gear's bigger, you roll it better. So, and if you did it in the 39.23, you have less. So there is a very technical point where we can simulate the same crank torque and inertia as we experience in racing by gear selection indoors as well. So that's getting very specific there. But I guess that's a tip. If you're doing an interval workout, to hit the bigger power in erg mode, put it in a bigger gear, and it is a little bit easier that way because there's more kinetic energy there. So that's a tip.
Yeah.
But in terms of simulating racing, absolutely, and we've done it. So what we can do now is we take race files, and I actually have the Spring Classics of last year ready to go as races, the finale, the last hour, where we put it into a program called Best Bike Split. We then, from there, we extract it into a race file, and you can go pretty much, like climb for climb, descent for descent, exactly what the same intensity would be in the race, and you can do it on the ergo as well. And it's very similar.
But what about the accumulative fatigue that you experienced before that? Like, I would love to arrive to the last hour of Tour of Flanders and give my best, but obviously there's 4 or 5 hours before that. How could someone like me, or even someone out there who wants to experience that, how do you try and replicate that kind of fatigue? Can you do that indoors?
You can. It's not as easy. You're not going to get the same amount of fatigue, but I guess you are going to experience the change in power, the stochastic nature of the cadence, the up and down descents and climbing and so on. So you're going to get used to just that fluctuation of power. So you're not going to go into it fatigued. But good question, because one thing that you are going to do when this is all over and you're back outdoors is, 4 hours endurance out on the road, come back in, throw the bike on the ergo, and do the last hour of Roubaix. It's possible and it can be done.
That was actually going to
be done.
That was going to be my next question. Great, can't wait. All right, well, what about this for an example? I know you can do the Richmond Worlds course on there. The Richmond Worlds was about 5 years ago, and it's a replica of the course, and there's also a London course as well, replica of the London Classic. How realistic is it though? I know you're speaking about you can create it with your erg mode and make the efforts more or less realistic, but actually if you're just riding the course that's on the computer and you're going up Box Hill in London, how realistic is it going up that climb in comparison to being out there going up Box Hill in real life?
Well, again, I would say very similar. There is a setting on Zwift which adjusts the intensity of the smart trainer, so you can go from 0 to 100%. Basically, it's the realism of the climb.
Yeah.
And it's actually pretty controversial, this one, because if you do say Alpe d'Huez, which is the replica of Alpe d'Huez, turn for turn, corner for corner, they say that if you do it, you should do it with the trainer difficulty. That's what it is, set to 100%. That way you get 100% realism. And what it means is that if it's 14% on Zwift, that's what you're going to feel on the smart trainer. But if you put it to 50%, obviously you're not going to feel the 14% grade is going to be a little bit less. So you actually use less gears. It's a very controversial topic, that one in the world of Zwift, how you set your trainer difficulty. But to get the realism, set it to 100 and ride Richmond, ride Central Park, New York, London, Yorkshire as well. It's for me, it's very, very real.
Why is it controversial?
Oh, look, I guess end of the day, people are on their riding, which is great. But for some reason, some people seem to think that to get the real experience and the real racers want to ride it with 100% realism, which is 100% trainer difficulty. So, it doesn't bother me as long as you're on there training. That's the main thing. But it's quite a topic out there in Zwift land.
I guess there's something that's going to lead us into another topic I wanted to talk about tonight was computer doping. I don't know if that's the correct terminology for it, but it's something I started to think myself when I was on there the other day. I was like, hang on, not to blow smoke up my ass, but this is what I do for a living. I'm a pro. I should be able to ride away from most non-pros, I would think. And I'm on there giving my best. I tell you what, I was giving my absolute best. And, I got a little gap for a bit, but actually I blew up. And next thing I know, I was struggling to hang on to the bunch. I was like, what's going on here? Am I suddenly, a bit tired, or am I unaware of all these guys on the other side of the world? Is there a way to actually make yourself go better on Zwift than you actually are? So can you dope on there? Not dope, that's not the right word, but can you tweak the system? Yeah,
look, it's called weight doping, and unfortunately it is a thing. And we are seeing it at the moment where a lot of the pros are on Zwift, and guys, a lot of pros they're racing B grade and getting beaten and so on. In the virtual world, it does happen. There's a lot of 40 kilo males out there racing at the moment, but at the end of the day,
explain to the gomads out there exactly how it works with power to weight.
Yeah, so look, obviously the less you weigh, the higher your watts per kilogram is going to be, which means as the gradient increases, the faster you're going to go. Watts per kilogram isn't as important when the road is flat, but with any gradient, that obviously increases. A lot of races are on Zwift, and you have to have your weight entered correctly. So there's a lot of unofficial races on there, but once we get to official races, and probably the next part of the conversation is esports, people actually have to film themselves, weighing themselves on the scales, and upload that, and it's all legitimate. So yeah, it is a thing. It does happen, but the other thing is too, like, I'm watching the riding at the moment too. Like, there's a lot of Mitchelton Scott guys on there. They've got some good workouts at the moment, and these guys are all riding 100% how it is for them with their weight and so on. And you can actually watch the watts per kilogram because it's on the screen in front of you of every rider, and you can do the maths and work out what their weight is actually input into the game as. So there's no hiding from there. And look, if you want to go on there and change your weight and beat Adam Yates up the Alpe d'Huez Zwift climb, good luck to you. That's great. But we know who's getting the better workout. But from this, the next conversation is esports, and that's definitely, it's a sport that it's coming. It's obviously in its infancy at the moment, and there's a few issues to work through. But as we saw it at Yorkshire, it's like 6-day racing. It's really entertaining. You're in the room with them. There's people drinking, eating, socialising, and there's racing going on in the background, and there's short races. It's entertainment. That's what it is. So
explain exactly what happened in Yorkshire, because I went to the Zwift house, I guess you'd call it, but that was after the Worlds, and I was just looking for a cold beer and wanted to check it out. But I missed all the racing. What exactly happened there?
Yeah, so at Yorkshire at the Worlds, every night there was racing happening, e-racing. We brought down the juniors, and we brought down the world champions, the people that won the race the day before would come down and race that night. There was like 6 on the stage, all did a weigh-in, all official, all calibrated, all the smart trainers. So it was they were really going head-to-head. The races were about 25 minutes. And it's just good entertainment, and from that, there's a whole league out there at the moment. It's already exists. People are racing for prize money. There's teams, and look, Zwift has an agreement with the UCI to provide the official indoor world championships. It's a thing. It's going to happen, and even like riders like Matthew Van der Poel, he's actually come out and said, I want to be the world champion on every UCI platform, whether it's cyclocross, mountain bike, road racing, and if e-racing is one of it, he wants to be a world champion as well. So it's a new sport. It's coming. It's going to be big. The long-term goal is Olympics for esports.
Wow, yeah, because I did read about the British champs that were already happening, and there was a bit of a controversial story there anyway, but aside from that, I just didn't realise there was a whole national champs or even like the world champs coming. And I guess when it's set up, is there a screen in front of the rider so they can see it and then a screen behind? Or how does that all work for the people viewing it?
Yeah, good point. So the rider has a screen in front of them, so they've got all the data of the other racers around them. And then behind the races are big screens, so all the spectators have a good view of the racing, and they can see what's going on. But the main thing is it's the atmosphere. It's a lot of fun, a lot of yelling, a lot of cheering, applauding. It's just good entertainment.
Is there some like pretty good tactics on? That's one thing I did struggle with when I've been using it lately. Is the whole tactical nous of racing is toned down a hell of a lot, and it just comes back down to if you're strong or if you're not. Opposed to when you're racing on the road, if you know where the wind's coming from and you know how to get around a bunch, you can get a lot further than, say, someone who's a lot stronger than you, but a bit race illiterate. Is there some tactics you can use in Zwift to make it, to race better?
Yeah, there is tactics. I guess the tough point is that it's hard to replicate the racing indoors in terms of rolling courses and so on, and to break away solo in a e-race is quite difficult. But there's also the fun side and there's the gaming side to it. So they have what they call power-ups. So you might be in a half-hour Zwift race, and as you go through certain sections, you get a random power-up. It could be you get increased draft, or you might get the feather power-up where you wait a little bit less. This is for a minute. These power-ups last for. And then there becomes this gaming element to it. So you've got to decide when you're going to use your power-up in the race, and it becomes just a bit of fun as well. So
right. Like you got
the gaming aspect to it as well.
The magic star in like Mario Kart, and a mushy to shoot and that sort of thing. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, right. So there's like drafting, and you get because I was speaking to Luke Durbridge, and he told me that because I said to him I did this one the other day, and I was like, I took off, and next thing I knew there was already a group away, and to try and get across to that group I was doing like 6 watts per kilo, what it feel like forever. He goes, no, what you got to do is you got to do like the first 30 seconds full gas, get off the line, get in the bunch, and then you can cruise. He goes, if you miss that jump, you got to have a hell of a job getting across. It's like a little trick he said he learned.
Yeah. The opening 2 minutes on Zwift races, it's full gas. But there's even what people have worked out is you need to log into the game. The earlier log in, you line up on the front of the line, basically. Oh. So if you log in late, it's like in a crit. You have to get to the front early and line up early and sit there for half an hour. But people log in, go away for half an hour, get ready, then come back and then run the front row of the race. So the same thing happens in Zwift.
Is that right? That's a good little tip. I'll do that because you can still ride on the line too, and you can still keep warming up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe you can give us some advice now for everyone listening out there who is a Zwift rider out there. Someone who's jumping on Zwift, say 3 days a week. What's the bang for their buck? What should they be aiming for? Is there some data out there they should be aiming for, FTP, or give me a little rundown on what your advice would be. Maybe for 3 days a week for a couple of weeks, what would you be sort of prescribing for someone?
Okay, so obviously a very open-ended question, but the main thing is that regardless of what your training goals are, you can meet those requirements indoors. So if you're looking to increase your VO2 or anaerobic capacity, you can get very specific with indoor training. But for me, the main point is to look at the different ways you can ride indoors to motivate yourself, entertain yourself to come back day after day. So you don't always have to do structured rides. So this is the beauty about Zwift now. To do a week of training on Zwift, we have the option of doing structured workouts where we spoke before, where there's a definite warm-up, intervals and so on, and erg mode, and there's no option other than to ride like that. Free ride, where you can go and ride the big climbs. You can go out do outdoor Zwift for an hour or one of the other tower climbs or a long climb like that as a free ride. You can do racing on there. You can do just group rides where they ride at 2.5 watts per kilo as a group and have a chat along the way as well. So there's so many ways to train indoors to entertain yourself. And I think a good program puts all those elements into a program to get the athlete to come back. But in terms of specificity, there's a lot of interest and popularity with these micro intervals and so on. We do 30-15s or 30-30s or 40-20s, and all those kind of things are very hard to put in place out on the road. So if you are doing those kind of intervals in your program, do them indoors where you can get very specific. You don't have to worry about traffic lights and stop signs and cars and so on, and you can hit the power with the right recovery and the right intensity and really get a good workout that way. So you can really hone in on the demands of your racing and replicate it indoors in your training.
What about not getting out of the seat ever? That's one thing I struggle with. Does that affect you when you go back out on the road? Just for instance, you're doing all your training indoors. Do you think there has to be a crossover period of, okay, you need to get out on the road and you need to feel the road and whatever demands riding on the road gives you? Do you need that for racing? I know Hayman actually proved that wrong, but I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
Again, the key point is that indoor riding complements your outdoor riding. So
okay.
it's not going to overtake. We're not going to do without the outdoor riding. We do need both. We do need the skill aspect to it as well, obviously. But again, like Hayman is just the example all the time because he was forced to do it indoors for, I think, the longest period of time. But there is that road feel. But there's so many people go force from being indoors and they go and do a ride outdoors and all of a sudden they think, actually, I've got some good fitness here. I'm feeling pretty good. Or they might ride with their mates and all of a sudden they're dropping them on the climb and they've just been doing a block indoors and they realise they've actually made gains there. I think we need to look at someone like Hayman, regardless of what your opinion about indoor training is, something happened there, very good, and he won the hardest one-day race in the world from training indoors. So you can't deny that it's a positive. But one thing we haven't spoken about here yet, we spoke about some of the gains and we talk about the increased core body temperature. It actually works the other way as well. So after 2016 and what Hayman achieved there, we started to look at, okay, there's something in this. How are we going to use this for next season, and with the other riders? And so even leading into a Grand Tour, and you're the example here as well, leading into a Grand Tour, you did a 10-day block of indoor riding that finished 4 days out from the start of a Grand Tour, things like that. So, we now know how to use it. And it's not just going to improve your performance in hot conditions. I've used it with riders in Strade Bianche. Look, Rob Power, here's an example. Same thing, Strade Bianche, late March. A few years ago, it was really cold weather. It was wet, windy, and Rob did a block of indoor training that finished only a few days before Strade Bianche. The weather was atrocious, and he had one of the best rides of his career at Pro Tour level to run sixth. And I think what we gained from indoor riding actually it makes your body more attuned, thermoregulation, to the conditions, both hot and cold. So we look at what the examples of the improvements are from indoor training. It's the increased VO2, it's the pedal stroke, and it's also the adaptation to the elements as well. There's so many benefits to it.
I'm actually getting motivated listening to this. I have to admit. I'm just like, God damn it, I need to be getting on the trainer a little bit more. And that ride you're speaking about with Rob, that was a brutal day. I think it was maybe the only guy who finished from Mitchelton that day. And he had some injuries for a few years leading before that. And that was his breakthrough ride. And since then, he hasn't looked back. I didn't know that story behind that. And this actually is a question I hadn't thought about until you were just speaking then. What does the future bring for us with this massive period of potentially indoor training where everyone is on it now? Does this mean that, I read an article saying that if the Tour de France goes ahead, with everyone not being able to have their normal preparation, the racing will still be there, but maybe it'll just be a slower Tour de France. Maybe not. After just hearing you say all that, if everyone's been on the indoor trainers, maybe we're going to have a world record breaking Tour de France and see some crazy stuff happening.
I think what we're going through now, again, it's going to force a large amount of the population to look further into how they train indoors and what those benefits are. And there's no reason, I think everyone's going to come out and go, actually, I'm quite fit and racing quite well. You don't have to do the volume as we spoke about before, whereas for a professional like yourself, 30 hours is kind of the goal for a training week, where 20 hours indoors, it's hard, but when there's those benefits there, it's achievable. A question I get asked quite often is, what's more important when you're training indoors? Is it the volume or is it the actual intervals you're doing indoors? For me, it's not so much the intervals. Whether you're doing 4 10-minute efforts or 5 7-minute efforts, they're all pretty similar. For me, the main thing is to be training indoors. I think the main aspect of indoor training, the main gains is that continued pedal stroke, as you spoke about before, the increased core body temperature. They're the main areas we're going to make gains from. Of course, intervals come down. If you're training for anaerobic or aerobic, that's going to be two very different areas of interval training there. But whether you're doing 40, 20s or 30, 15s, for me, it doesn't really matter that much. It's the point that you're training indoors, you're doing back-to-back sessions, day in, day out, and that's where you're going to make the gains from.
Mate, well, thank you very much, Kev, for giving us that little insight tonight. I don't want to speak too much longer because we've got a few little tricks up our sleeve, and being my coach, let's try and keep them up our sleeve. But no, I think it was a great little insight, and I'm actually not lying. I'm feeling a hell of a lot more motivated towards the indoor trainer after this conversation. Thanks, mate.
No problems. And look, if I could just finish with a general comment, like a lot of people are being forced to train indoors and they're discovering what the options are and what the benefits are. Just really embrace it, experiment with it, but just really be confident that the work you're doing indoors, it is quality work and you're going to come out of this with really good form. So yeah, best of luck to everyone through this current period in the world, and good luck with your training.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you.
Well, there we have it, the ins and outs of Zwift, and I hope you learned something because I was still learning some things there, talking to my own coach about indoor training. How about you, Lionel, with your turbo set up, ready to go? You think you've got some tips there?
I mean, I was probably a pretty late adopter to Zwift, really. That sums me up. All round, really, never the first at the cutting edge of technology, to be honest. But it really, that and some other apps as well, to be honest, have really revolutionised the effects of training indoors. And it's really the mental aspect of it, which I think you guys touched on quite well. Is it just that sitting on the trainer, or the ergo as you guys down under call it, it's not easy, is it? It's not easy for the regular amateur rider like me, and it can't be much easier for the pros either, although you guys are at least getting paid to do it, but the fact that there's something to interact with just makes it so much easier on the mind. You feel the time passing, and it does bring out that little competitive and community spirit to it as well. I mean, the first time I was riding round on Zwift after signing up, I'd put a tweet out saying I'm going to give it a go, and within 10 minutes of riding round, someone had written a comment saying ride on napalm. Now, napalm, if those who listen to the regular podcast, that's the nickname Daniel Freeb has for me. And I stopped pedaling, like mid pedal stroke. I was like, what the heck? How do you talk to someone on here? And I just thought this is there's a real fun aspect to it. Being a computer gamer as a kid as well, like on the old Commodore 64 or the Commodore Amiga, and then the PlayStation and stuff came along a little bit later. The game aspect of it as well is something that appeals to me, although I'm not a big fan of the sort of the unrealistic landscapes. I really prefer my landscapes to look real. So I loved it when they brought out the Richmond World Championship course, and I've asked some pro riders, how similar to actually riding that course over in America is it? And they were saying, well, it looks exactly the same. You could learn the course off riding around it on Zwift, so you can see the benefits of it from so many different aspects. And just hearing to Kevin, obviously a performance coach, using a piece of technology as a tool to help all of you guys that he's working with get the best out of their bodies. I mean, it must have revolutionised things from his point of view as well, as the Matt Hayman story proved.
I think the Matt Hayman story for me is the only thing that really keeps me coming back to it. And I think, you know what, Hayman won Roubaix on this thing. It has to work, because when I'm out there and I'm racing guys and I'm getting completely beaten, I'm like, God, what is this thing? So it is really, really tough. And, you know, for anyone out there who's ridden with me or raced against me, I am giving my best out there. Don't think that I'm slacking off. And if you've beaten me, I don't doubt it. You've beaten me fair and square. So it's been a hell of a lot of fun, and it's definitely kept me rolling the last 2 weeks of my indoor training. And I want to have this opportunity also to say thanks a lot in these times as well for Will Jones, who's behind the scenes, who's helping piece all these episodes together, which is fantastic, and especially for Lara behind the scenes for me, doing a lot of stuff in the producing. So I want to extend my thanks to those guys there too. Also, some exciting news. Last week was the first drop of the new mini-series Life in the Peloton is doing called Talking Luft. And the idea is I've got these guests on every week doing my normal podcast with the cycling podcast. And I thought, hang on, if I can get them for 10 more minutes afterwards, the podcast, and just get a little bit more information out of them and just put this little mini series together, I'm just going to give a little bit more content to you guys. So every second week, back on the old Life in the Peloton podcast handle, you can go and check that out. And we've got Talking Luft there. It's a little 10-minute fun episode. So make sure you go and check that one out as well. And then every other week, we're going to be on the Cycling Podcast, putting out our normal episode as well.
Yeah, I had to listen to that, Mitch. Really enjoyable sort of bonus, almost like a sort of DVD extra. If you remember DVDs, they're not exactly current. I told you I wasn't an early adopter. I'm still stuck with a DVD player. But yeah, what's the origin of the phrase Luft, Talking Luft? Is that an Aussie thing?
Luft separately is just purely referring to the way you wear your casquette, as in the cycling cap. And if everyone remembers back in the day when everyone used to race in cycling caps, there was a certain way to wear them. And I feel like that is being lost. If you look at a guy like Miguel Indurain, he's a perfect example of having that Luft. And Luft is just a German word for air. And it purely refers to the air between the top of your head and the hat inside. So you want that ultimate Luft. And when you're riding, you want that cap to stay well. You don't want it to collapse either. So it's quite a ridiculous thing. And, Bjarne Riis used to have quite a lot of Luft, but because he didn't have the afro underneath, it used to collapse at the front. Miguel Indurain had the afro, tucked it under, perfect Luft. So we're talking Luft because we're talking style. We're talking about all these kinds of funny little things that we do as cyclists. And then we're also just talking other little habits and things people do just to find out a little bit more about them. So it's a funny little saying, but I sort of liked it.
You've got to wear your casquette, your cap, almost as if, you're wearing it rather than, it's wearing you. You don't pull it right down over the top of your head. It's almost as if it's just balanced there, but it's got to stay in position. That's basically the essence of it, isn't it?
Exactly. I feel like it's been lost a little bit with the whole hipster movement and guys wearing caps in coffee shops making coffee behind the scenes, not even on a bike. Luft was lost. There was no Luft. It was like zero amount of Luft. So let's bring the Luft back. Let's educate people on how to wear caps, and let's talk Luft in Talking Luft. So guys, yeah. I
think, Mitch, you're going to have to, just before you go, I think you might have to dig out a few examples of some classic Luft and post them. Maybe we'll do a little collection of classic Luft and put them on your Instagram.
Or hit me up. If you are wondering, or if you know Ultimate Luft, send it out to me. Send me a link. Send me something on Instagram, and we'll put together a little Ultimate Luft tribute. I hope I can make that tribute.
It's a good point. I'm going to have to search for pictures of you in a cap. I think I've found a couple already, Mitch. I'm going to send them over to you.
Oh, great. Well, we're banging on here. So, guys, until next week, you got Talking Luft coming up, and in 2 weeks' time, we've got a fresh podcast for you. So, thanks for tuning in. Cheers, Lionel. Stay calm there.
Thanks a lot, Mitch. You too.
You have been listening to Life in the Peloton. The producer of this episode was Will Jones. The music in this episode was composed by Pete Shelley. Thanks, mate.